This is the ultimate video series for the Georgia football fan. 6 decades of Georgia football legends in one room for one full day, telling the stories that made the Georgia Bulldogs one of the best college football programs in the nation. Names that reflect history: Buck Bellew, Zeke Britkowski, Kevin Butler, Johnny Carson, Mike Cavan, Tony Kusenberry, Vince Dooley, Pat Dye, Damon Evans, Steve Greer, Glenn Harrison, Terry Hogue, Patrick Hodgson, John Casey, Horace King, Guy McIntyre, George Patton, John Roush, Theron Sapp, Lindsey Scott, Lauren Smith, Bill Stanfill, Joe Tereshinski Jr., Charlie Trippi, Herschel Walker, Neil Williamson, Charlie Whittemore, Scott Warner, Ray Rissmiller, Eric Zier. The legends of Georgia football telling their stories, the victories, the defeats, the locker room chatter, stories about the Georgia football legends told by the legends themselves. And it's all here for you, the Georgia Bulldog fan. Now, how about them dogs?
We were talking about legacy and tradition and having six decades and many generations, 13 All-Americans and countless SEC, all-SEC performers and 10 SEC championships all sitting in this room. And we were going to get started with talking with Mr. Trippi, since he is at the forefront of a lot of this heritage for us, he and Mr. Roush. But Joe Tereshinski wanted to share something about the players of today and what Coach Richt is doing with today's program and the way that Georgia is embracing the great players and teams of Georgia's past. Joe?
When Mark came in, he pulled the staff together and he pulled the young players together, and he said there's 4 things that they're going to make this program. And those 4 things are, first, your relationship with the Lord. That's the first and foremost. The second thing was to go out and recruit players. You have to have the players to compete on this field in this game today. The third thing was to mold those players into a team. And once you have that team, he wanted everybody to learn about the tradition that came before them. And so what Mark has gone ahead and done is he's rebuilt our locker room. He's redesigned the bottom floor, which is the players' floor. And when you walk in there, you see life-size figures of all the All-Americans and all SEC players all throughout the locker room. He talks about former players and what they had accomplished, because he wants the players of today to know those that have came before them, because it's the tradition and the history and the lineage of the Georgia player that makes them and our program great that it is. So the players of the day know all the linemen. They know every one of your names that are sitting in this room. On top of that, what he wanted them to do was to know who wore their number. And in the lockers are the names of every player that wore that number that the current players wear and what their accomplishments were. So the players of today are learning about their heritage every time they walked in our locker room.
That's quite a heritage. Charlie, will you start us out talking about Coach Butts? I know that there are a lot of younger guys in the room who never got to meet Coach Butts.
Well, when I first went to Georgia, they were starting a new football tradition. The practices were long, hard, and very physical. We started out with 65 freshmen that year, and at the end of the year, we ended up with 18. The worst possible scenario you could ever have in football is to have the practice field next to the stadium. Under Butts's philosophy, practices usually would be from 4 to 6. But if the practice didn't agree with Coach Butts, we'd move into the stadium and finish up. We would practice until maybe 7 o'clock at night. But the one thing about Coach Butts was that you learn how to win. The preparation was always totally in agreement with the whole coaching staff that what we were going to do would bring a winning team. Back when I first went to Georgia, we didn't have any football tradition. And of course, it was very important to start a tradition. And the perception back then was anytime you played between the hedges, you had to win. If you didn't win, you was a complete failure. But I learned a great deal more playing for Coach Butts when I had the opportunity to coach for him. He was quite a fanatic about passing. His philosophy about passing was that you always had to throw the football under pressure. He says anybody can catch a ball with warm-ups on, but he had a certain rule about throwing the ball under pressure. If a lineman ever missed a block during our passing drill under pressure, he would make the lineman stand back there like a quarterback, put the ball up in his hand, and make a lineman run over him. That was part of the training that Coach Butts instituted into the football program. Believe me, after that, linemen would do everything possible to not let the quarterback get sacked. They would tackle, they would grab, they would do everything, which was illegal at that particular time.
They would. Well, by the time Coach Butts was retiring, Pat, I guess he had eased up a lot. Is that right?
Not a lot. Because his last 4 years was my 4 years at Georgia. And I imagine he'd probably mellowed a little bit. Coach Trippi was on the staff, and Coach Rouse was on the staff, and we had, four great years and one great year as a football team in 1959, and won the conference championship that year. Beat Auburn in Athens, between the hedges, and
passing was always a great.
Yeah, I was sitting there thinking about my growing up in Georgia and listening to Trippi play against Charlie Justice in the Sugar Bowl in 1946-47 Sugar Bowl, and watching Zeke throw to John and Harry Babcock and all the teams in the 40s when they were building the football tradition that Charlie was talking about. And then, of course, we had the one good year while I was playing at Georgia, and then Coach Dooley came in, and then the tradition's only gotten stronger over the years, and it's my loyalty's at another school now, but I was born and raised in that, Bulldog born and Bulldog bred, and when I die, I'll be a Bulldog dead. Well, I can't say that today, but anyway, I've been there before, and I know what it's like.
Horace, you're going to take us into Coach Dooley's years.
Yeah, Coach Dooley years, passing was something that we talked about from time to time. There was three things that could happen when you throw a pass, and two of them was bad. We running it.
Yeah, that's right. When we transitioned into the Coach Dooley years, a few of you were on the teams that went from Coach Griffith to Coach Dooley, and I know that when we're young, we all think that anybody over 30 is ancient. And Vince, you were just 31 years old at the time, I guess, when you got the job. Ray, you were part of that team, and Pat, you were part of that team, right? And what was it like, the transition from Coach Griffith to suddenly 31-year-old Vince Dooley coming in?
Well, first of all, I think myself, Casey, George, Ray, we needed to thank Coach Griffith for at least having the oversight to take us to the University of Georgia on scholarship. We were fortunate. Coach Trippi was my coach when I was there, and I think having gone on and having coached 30 years, I think it was a time of transition. It was the following a legend, which Coach Griffith had to do with Coach Butts. And I think those were tough years on him, but there was a good nucleus of players. I mean, it's like Coach Trippi said, they taught us to be tough. There was no way you came to Georgia and didn't learn how to hit and want to play in long practices. And so when Coach Dooley came in, I think that was, we heard, we asked, who's this new coach coming in? All we had, the word we had was a freshman coach from Auburn, and Coach Eves had been there. And I remember, Ray, you were one of them. I don't know if Casey, I know we went up the first day to the continuing ed center to meet Coach Dooley, and we were eyeballing him and he was eyeballing us, and so it didn't take about 2 or 3 days. I forgot when it happened, but remember they called a meeting in Stegman Hall, and this was during the springtime, and it was a first team meeting with the new staff, and so we came down there, and as usual, a bunch of our guys, I know they weren't at class, but a bunch of guys showed up about 10 or 15 minutes
like
late.
discipline.
Yeah.
I think that's the word, discipline.
Yeah, and so, they kind of got after, well, the next day they called a meeting. I mean, it was after a little bit of a stern talk, and everybody was there about 15 minutes early, and they took roll, and he said, now that's how we have meetings, and that's all the meeting was about, just to learn to be on time. So we started a new set of disciplines and new players and new attitude, and of course, I think, it's all the guys, the traditions before us were the silver helmets, and, that's when the red helmets came in and a lot of things started to change.
Neil, I don't understand all this talk about Vince not throwing the ball. He threw it. Wasn't but about like that, but it was to Herschel.
All right, I have a word for the folks who played, or 2 words that played for Coach Dooley. Bloody Tuesday. Practices. Steve?
Well, that's what it was, Bloody Tuesday. You buckled your chin strap when you first walked on the field and hoped it stayed buttoned because you were going to get hit right in the mouth. And that lasted until Coach retired because I was there for a lot of years coaching under him.
So every day in the week was really Tuesday.
Looking from a old lineman's perspective, and those were different days. Coach Dooley, the 2 words is discipline, and he brought the discipline. We had some good ball players. Jim Wilson. I mean, Jim and I were both All-Americans for Coach Dooley. Platoon is another word that comes to, because in our day we played both ways. My son Scott played at the University of Georgia also, and no matter what he says, I like to tell him, always tell him, we played both ways, Scott, so don't tell me how tough it was, okay? and Coach made a decision, and I'm sure it was all thought out very nicely, because to go offense and defensive teams. And in those days we didn't do that. I mean, and of course he picked me to go offense. Oh, come on. I want to play offense. I want to play defense. Well, it didn't work out that way. I played offense. But you know what? About the 3rd game, if I remember right, about the 3rd game, we were winning. And I didn't care. I didn't care where he played me. But as we started to win and as we started to understand, and the other thing was frequencies. Frequencies. I never understood frequencies. We would, I'm not sure if he instituted that program, but we would watch these films and we would know what you're going to do on 9 out of 10 plays, and all of a sudden, golly, that works. That's what they're doing. So those are some of the things that I remember, plus the fact he about ran me off. Other than that, I remember him saying, and I remember him saying, he said, I'm a brand new coach, Ray. I got 5 years, 6 years. He said, I don't need you. You're going to do it our way, or you're going to hit the highway to Pennsylvania. I did it his way. And God bless America. Thank God for it.
Ray, my first spring practice, and by the way, I happened to have been in Coach Dooley's first full recruiting class. And I don't know why after the lull period in between Coach Butts and Coach Dooley, but being recruited by several different schools, I wasn't at the beginning strongly considering Georgia. But after visiting the campus and seeing the excitement of the folks that were on the team, and I shunned those other offers and decided that this is where I want to stay in state. So I signed, but that first spring practice, they couldn't make up their mind whether myself or David Roletter would play offense or defense. Well, when one would be going against number 2 and vice versa, you'd get a break. Well, David Roletter and I swapped jerseys. And we stayed on the field the whole time. Well, after one practice of a 4-hour Saturday afternoon session, Next Saturday came up. When it came my turn to have that offensive jersey on, I was blowing assignments on purpose. Coach Bill, Vince's brother, really let me hear about it too. But the next Monday, I was on the defensive side.
Well, maybe that's what I should have done. Now, Coach Dooley was well, not in the background. I mean, we knew who the boss was, but Bill was the enforcer. So
I always thought you were a very pleasant change, because they'd already tried to run me off that year before you came. And a lot of us, I got a lot of extra attention up at Tallulah Falls. I'll never forget it.
Did you earn it?
Sir?
Did you earn the attention?
No, they just wanted some extra practice because they knew that we weren't very talented, so we obviously needed to tackle and grass drill some more, teach us.
You think back in those days, those early days, I came in with Bill on that same freshman team, and you talk about the Pyburns list after practice. And if you were on Pyburns, a lot of those guys didn't even go out to practice. They just went and packed their bags. They knew they were going to hit the road.
A number of you ended up coaching after playing at Georgia, and a number of you ended up coaching for Coach Dooley. What was it like when you made that transition, whether you coached or not? For instance, you know, Scott, when you stepped away from the game and you suddenly come back and you're no longer playing for Coach Dooley, how did he treat you differently?
I don't think I think I was more along the lines of treating him differently, as he never treated me any differently in all the years. Now that I'm much more mature, it is a different relationship, and I go back to my Georgia tradition. I played for Wayman Sellers in high school, and Wayman was on the 47, 46, and 47 teams, and he was a Wally Butt's protege from the most brutal practices in the world in high school, going both ways, drinking water.
no,
Drinking water was
just couldn't do it.
unheard of. Well, I survived high school, and I never understood, being 16, 17, 18 years old, Wallace Butts, but I understood Wayman Sellers. It was kill or be killed, or get off the field, miss practice, or you're hurt, get up. It don't cost me a timeout on the. But when I got to Georgia, and I didn't have to play both ways, I wouldn't have minded. This is a piece of cake, and it really was. But I finally started to understand where Coach Sellers had come from, and how much the game of football had transpired for me. But yeah, I didn't understand it. I wasn't Georgia born and raised. Now I am, but it.
Well, I'm one of those damn Yankees. I stayed, and I ain't going back.
There's a bunch of them around here.
I say we have a whole Pennsylvania pipeline in here, don't we?
I had a background, though. See, my high school coach played at the University of Georgia. Dave Hart. He played behind. He said, I had to leave. He says, because I'd never play in front of Charlie. He said, you looked at Charlie running around out there, and he says, after the war, he went to St. Vincent, but he always had Georgia in his heart. And when I had an opportunity, he says, that's where you need to go to school. And all of us are influenced by our high school coaches. Every one of us. I don't care. Anybody in here can say they'd listen to their high school coach probably a little bit more than they did to their own dads. Most of the time. Coaching was very influential in my life because Johnstown at that particular time was the power in Western Pennsylvania. We never lost a football game.
I thought it was because they only gave you one offer for a scholarship, and that was it.
Yeah, that might have been true.
with your 2 pair of pants and 1 shirt that you
There you
carried
go.
in your suitcase
That
that
was
you
it.
used to always tell
That
us
was
about.
it. But, you know, they,
When we was there, though, we had.
He must have upgraded. Coach Casey used to always tell us that he left Pennsylvania with his 2 pair of pants and his 1 shirt.
Amen, brother. That's right.
And told him to never come back.
well, I did come back.
fought every day.
What was it 62, 63? That winter, Georgia didn't go to bowl game. And I walked up to the porch. It was, I knocked on the door, and Dad opened the door. He says, I thought that was a 4-year scholarship. He didn't expect to see me.
Case, when I first came to Georgia as a freshman, we lived in Lipscomb Hall, and there was a little bridge from the parking lot to the dormitory. And my parents dropped me off, and I'm walking across that bridge, and there's Casey, and I said, oh my God, I got to be around this guy for the next 3 or 4 years. And I got to know John a little bit, but I was afraid to talk to him because he wore his hair really greased back and tight T-shirts and tight blue jeans. Big son of it. But he always had this little round thing in his tight jean pocket. And finally, I got up enough nerve. I said, Mr. Casey, what is that in your back pocket there? He pulls it out and said, yeah, son, it's a can of snuff. Have you ever seen any snuff?
I'm glad I gave that habit up.
I bet you are. How about moving into the 80s a little bit? Herschel, thoughts about getting to know the coaches when they were recruiting you and coaching you as opposed to when you got out of school? Different relationship?
Oh, it's much different. Coach Cavan was totally different. He's a different man. But, you know, it was strange because I was scared to death of Coach Dooley. You know, I come from such a small town. I was scared to death. I didn't know what to expect, you know. And when I got up, I was scared to death of him until I think I got out of Georgia and realized that he had a much bigger personality because whatever he told me to do, I was going to do it. And it was strange because, you know, being at Georgia I enjoyed it not because of things I did, but because of what Coach Dooley taught me. And I think it's something that, and I look back and I say, you know, it's something they talk about teamwork and team. Because, you know, when I got to Georgia, I thought the best athlete there was Freddie Gilbert. When Freddie came from Griffin, I thought Freddie was amazing. And I remember, and Scott didn't know this, but I used to watch Scott because I thought he was a tough kid. And it was weird because I admired him to see that how tough he was. I remember watching him get hurt, and I reckon now since he was just mentioning that about his coach, that there was no such thing as being hurt or pain, and I thought that was amazing. I remember talking to Terry. I don't know if he remembered this, but we were in a study hall once, and Terry wasn't studying. And I later learned that he didn't need to. I later learned that he didn't need to study, but and I realized just how much that I had to work to get to where those guys were at because I thought it was absolutely amazing. Like I said, once I got out of football, I realized that football was something that just made me become a better person. And being around someone like Coach Dooley, Coach Cavan, who you know, at first I said, that man, he's wild. But I realized that he wasn't. He was a coach that just had to get the players to trust in what he was talking about. And Coach Dooley was a leader, which was what you look for on a team, or you look for when you go to war. You look for someone that you can trust in. And no matter what, I trusted in him. If he had told me that it was dark, it's day outside, I would have believed it. And said, okay, let's go. It's time to go. And no matter what, I was ready to go when he called me.
You use the war analogy, and you go to war with each other in the battles, and then when you get out and you go on to the pros or you go on elsewhere in life, there is that camaraderie, that red and black camaraderie. I know that you and Zeke were talking about when Zeke was coaching you. And Zeke, how was it for you to watch Georgia players come up through the pros all your years playing and coaching as well?
You know, it was interesting. Charlie makes you reminisce a little bit about Coach Butts in Georgia. And in that era, when we played, John Carson and I, Notre Dame and Georgia were the two college teams that had more people in the pros than any other college teams in the country. And that was really something because Harry Babcock, who was one of our receivers, was the bonus pick. He was the best player in the country that year. And it was unique. It was unique. And listen to Herschel talk, and I'm reminiscing a little bit. John can relate to this about Coach Dooley's toughness, and Herschel, you'll appreciate this, although I never did this to you, but there was a running back by the name of Lauren Hargrove who came in the spring prior to the freshman reporting, and John and I were freshmen together, and they had a drill for Lauren to toughen him up. And most of the time, if you have that so-called nutcracker drill, we all know what that is. Or at least there's a lineman block and another lineman. The running back has to run off his block. Well, we had a center quarterback, Lauren Hargrove, lined up in the backfield, and there were two linebackers standing there. And we'd hand the ball off to him, and he had to go through those two linebackers live. And it was not just one time. It was many, many times that he had to do that. It was going to toughen him up. And Charlie talks about how tough the practices were and everything. John can relate to this a little bit. When we were freshmen, we had, it's hard to explain what they were, but they were like a catcher's shield, but it went all the way down your legs. And the freshmen had to wear them on defense. Well, Coach Butts was a great coach for a lot of reasons. One of them was the fact that he had us 17-year-olds, and he had all the World War II veterans there. They were all parachuted, they'd been shot at, they flew airplanes, whatever, and they were married, had children, they were living on the GI Bill, and he had to coach those two different groups. But when you were on defense, I mean, we were like Frankenstein out there trying to play, and we just got the dog knocked out of us. I mean, and that was one of the things, he just toughened us up. And I've been very privileged because Coach Butts laid the groundwork, and then I had the opportunity to play for George Halas and then Coach Lombardi. So that groundwork and everything has really played dividends to me in my life. Not so much from the football standpoint, but now. There's a lot of nice memories, but the foundation that those coaches laid after we got out was more important, really.
I can tell you this, they still had those little aprons you were talking about, because I grew up through the Sam Mervis University, which was the B team, and they told us to wear those pads so that the other people wouldn't get hurt. And that wasn't to protect us, it was protect the guys that were blocking us or tackling us. And the whole thing was, you know, you had to get down and you had to move quick, and if you didn't do it, you had to do it over and over and over, and it was an impossible thing to do. So Coach Dooley kept those aprons, and we used them. And Sam Mervos, as I said, when we had practice, we used to take the red helmet and we put SMU on it for Sam Mervos University. So he was still a part of that.
You know, one of the rules that they improvised, Coach Dooley, you can remember this, I think it was 1951, where you could hit from the waist up in the back. And we had to practice punt returns with those things on, and both those guys would be coming in from behind you, just live punt returns. But there's a freshman running down the field in these, whatever they were called, and we couldn't move. And now these guys are drilling us in the back, and a lot of sand in your mouth, I'll tell you that.
You've been awfully quiet sitting over here.
Well, I've been waiting to be asked to say something.
You guys just jump right in and make believe I'm a fly on the wall.
Well, first of all, I've been sitting here thoroughly enjoying all the stories because they're absolutely great. And Joe Tereshinsky started off talking about Coach Rick and tradition. And it's interesting as I reflected on that, how I got started, because not knowing it at the time, but I was part of an early tradition of Georgia, even when I went to Auburn, because Coach Jordan, who was the head coach there, was the line coach under Coach Butts. And he came and he brought all the Georgia coaches with him. So they basically put in the Georgia system, which was line up and knock the heck out of you, you know? So early on, I didn't know it at the time, but I was a part of the Georgia tradition, being at Auburn at the time. And then when I came to Georgia as a relatively young coach at 31, I didn't know I was that young at the time, but nevertheless, there was a lot of controversy at Georgia. And the first thing that I did, even though I was advised not to, was to pay my respects to the person that had established the tradition at Georgia, and that was Coach Butts.
22 years as coach of the University of Georgia football team, his teams won 4 Southeastern Conference championships and played in 7 postseason bowl games, which is incredible. Now, on Saturday afternoons, I used to call the CBS sports desk to find out how Georgia had done that day. When the Bulldogs came out of nowhere to win that SEC title, and win the Orange Bowl game with Missouri, I was one damn Yankee who was really delighted. With no ifs, ands, or buts, Wally was one of the best.
Charlie remembers, and Zeke and Johnny, that there was a lot of controversy at Georgia at the time. But in my mind, Coach Butts, who had been there 22 years, had established an incredible tradition, and that I needed to go and pay my respects to him as the new coach. And I remember going over and sitting down in his office, and for 1 hour listening to him tell stories. Now, he could tell some of the greatest stories, those that know Coach Butts, knew Coach Butts, because he could tell a lot of great stories. And I just sat there, and when I got up, I thanked him. And he never forgot that, because the whole time that he lived, every Monday after a football game, I got a letter from him. If we won, he would be congratulating me. If we lost, he would console me and say I'd been there before, and just in a nice way. And I don't know how in the world those letters got to me on Monday. Evidently dictated on Sunday, and got it done because it was there. And he was always supportive, because what I wanted to do was to learn about Georgia, because I was new. I mean, I had no background on Georgia, and the first way to learn was to learn and express my appreciation to Coach Butts, and then to study Georgia, and to study Georgia's history, and that's part of the experience, because I think it's important, if you're someplace, you got to have appreciation for the history of wherever you are. And that is the thing that's impressed me about Coach Rick, and that he has that sense of appreciation. He's not just bringing Florida State to Georgia. Heck, we're Georgia. And he is learning to appreciate that. And so one of the reasons I hired him, because I felt like he had some sense. I think it's important to be that way. So that's what we're talking about. And what a span of time we have here from Coach Butts and right on up to those that had the good fortune of coaching. And then we've got Eric, that's been through an era, and Joe, who has seen so much. And I have to go back to John Casey over there, Mother Casey, who has been probably with me probably longer than anybody, 41 years, so he's seen a lot. And every time that I want to find out some detail, some insight on a player, I know where to go, because he'll tell me. So all of these are sort of intertwined, and what is so great about this session is to see it all come together, and everybody to share stories and have the common bond that only happens when you're with a team, or if it's military in the military. But in this case, we're talking about team. So I think that's the important thing, is the tradition that started, and it will always be. And I'm very proud that Coach Rick is doing the job he's doing in maintaining that and appreciating it. Some coaches don't do that. They want to make their own, but you can't make your own unless you have an appreciation for what's been there, and then you help to build on it.
Those who have gone before.
Proud of it.
Yeah. Mike, you didn't have a choice. You were coming to Georgia one way or another.
Well, that's a long story, but yeah, I was talking about high school coaches. I played for my dad, and who actually played at Georgia, and he played under Coach Mayer, which was before Coach Butts, and I grew up knowing Georgia football because of that. And my uncle actually played with Coach Tripp and Ken Kuiper. Red Kuiper was my uncle, and so I knew all about Coach Butts, through Ken, and of course my dad, he was a tough football coach. And my oldest brother came along at a time when Georgia was not very good. It was in the Johnny Griffith era. Coach Butts had gone, and Coach Dooley hadn't come yet, and so my oldest brother wanted to go to Georgia Tech, and he went to Georgia Tech, played for Coach Dodd. So I came along, and I was a quarterback, and I thought I was pretty decent. And Coach Dye actually recruited me, and he was at Alabama. So I said I was going to go to Alabama and play for Coach Bryant. So my dad said, "No, I'm going to do that." Well, I said, "Well, this is not going to be that hard to do." I said, "I can overcome my dad. I've overcome this coaching for 4 years. I can overcome this." Well, it went on, and I got paid back later on in my life for people holding out and recruiting, like Herschel and some other guys. I held out. We had signed in December. I said, I just wouldn't go anywhere. That's just fine with me. And so about January or late January, one day I said, I don't think my dad's going to let up on this. So I went to him and said, I think I'm ready to go to Georgia. And so I went to Georgia, and my little brother went to Alabama. So, but anyway, and my mother only had one son with any sense. I guess you know who that is. That's me. But I never regretted it. It was the best thing I ever did. Being at Georgia and playing for Coach Dooley and having friends, and it's all about friendship and teammates. That's what it's about. And I had my career there, then got into coaching, stayed with Coach Dooley for 13 years coaching, and then I went out on my own and for 16 years, and I'm back at Georgia now, where I need to be. And but it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Great stories, good gracious alive. I think about Coach Trippy when I was an assistant at Georgia, and I used to play a lot of golf. Coach Dooley, in fact, never could find me. I was on the golf course, and I'd always beat Coach Trippy out at the country club and 4 or 5 guys, and I'd play all right. I'm not that good, but Coach Trippy would pick me, and he'd say, "You're my partner today," and he said, "And we're going to win or I'm going to whip your ass." I say, "Yes, sir." And I mean, he was serious. So I knew about his competitiveness then. I mean, I'd always heard he was the greatest competitor that ever played at Georgia, and I don't doubt that at all because he was serious. We stuck that tee in the ground, buddy, and I guarantee you we were going to win. But all the things. And Stanford, you got to tell them the story about Georgia, Florida, and we won 51-0 in '68.
Well, some of my
great story.
Most fondest memories were against the Gators in Jacksonville.
Yeah. We got to get back to
that.
that.
Early in
we got to get back to some of those memories.
A long time. They're getting old.
That's right.
Early in the recruiting process, I was offered a scholarship to University of Florida, and I bluntly told Coach Grays I was not interested. That was not one of my choices. But in 1966, we had taken a 1-point loss into Jacksonville. We lost 7-6 to UM in the Orange Bowl. Florida was undefeated, and we went in there, and they had Stevie was their quarterback. That was the year he won.
Who was that?
Stevie. That was the year they won. He won the Heisman Trophy. And I tell you what, I always refer to that game as my college game as the one most memorable because we took number 11 to the woodshed, especially all day long. He didn't even have time to do his usual whining because he was too busy picking his ass up off the ground. We kept him on the ground that day. And after that game, walking off the field, I always refer to statute of limitations as run out on me now, Coach.
Absolutely.
that was my first pro game. I had a very stellar performance that day, and the fans, I had no earthly idea. You know, they were all liquored up and everything. They filled my helmet up full of money. Which is, as a college boy, I appreciate it.
As your first pro game.
But then in
I'm retired now.
then you hadn't heard it all yet. Then in '67, that was the only time I ever lost to Florida. We had a fluke play and lost 17-16 down there. And this is one thing I'd never have quite understood why Coach Dooley had me do this, because I felt like he was talking out of both sides of his mouth.
To do that sometimes.
They had this All-American running back, and he was coming in to block me, and I lay a flipper on his head and knock him out. I thought I'd kill the guy. He was Larry Smith was there. He was, the Gators, they were wanting to fight and this, that, and the other, and we wound up losing the game, which was a disappointment. But Monday, I get summoned to come see Coach Dooley. He said, Bill, we've looked at the film. It was a clean hit. But there's been so much press about it. I want you to write Larry a letter and apologize to him. I said, do what now, Coach? You teach us to hit all the time and now apologize for hitting and then KOing somebody? And he could tell I was stammering around, didn't really want to do it. And finally he says, will you sign it if I write it? And then one of the good stories. This is one of the fond memories of really taking him to the woodshed. It was a torrential downpour in 1968. You couldn't see the other side of the field. And we get out to a 35-0 halftime lead and kick off to them. Defense goes out, stops them. The offense gets the ball, scores. So we're up 42-0. Eric comes over, says, and Greer was one of us, said, y'all are through for the day. Well, I really wasn't used to coming out of a ball game, so what am I supposed to do? Well, I've always heard about the reputation that you have in Jacksonville, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. So I get my Coca-Cola cup and stick it through the fence, and the fans fill it up for me. But like I say, the statute of limitations is run out. No wind sprints tomorrow morning.
Not only did he stick it through that fence once, he stuck it through that fence the whole second half. I saw him.
I thought he was woozy after the game because of the contest.
Coach, he was ripped after the game, I can tell you that.
Hey, Coach, I've never heard your story with the guys coming up with this recruiting deal, I'm trying to figure out how I ended up at Georgia. Your story.
Well, you were tough to recruit. If you remember, you along with Richard Appleby, y'all were real pioneers, and you probably had some reservations about coming to UGA, along with Larry West from Albany, Chuck Kennebrew from up in Rome. Larry is incidentally the pastor of one of the biggest Baptist churches in the D.C. area.
DC,
yeah, and we brought y'all back 2 years ago after a 30-year reunion as the first African Americans to play football and sign at the University of Georgia. So we had to do a good job of convincing you that we were going to treat you like we treat my son, and that's what I said. I remember Larry West saying, I have no reservations about that. You wasn't so sure, that.
Neither was I.
Yeah. What kind of reservations? But I do know this, that at a time about the second or third year that you were there, we had a little bit of a controversy on the team. We had Chuck Kennebrew at one end, we had Craig Hertwick at the other end, and they hadn't learned good race relations yet, you know. So we had a meeting, and a lot of people were trying to talk to you. And you made this statement that, that the two things that you have a responsibility to do was to go to school and get your degree and to play football. And everything else was secondary to that. So you weren't worried about anything else that was going on. You went to class, you got your degree, and you played football, you played it extremely well. And so you were a real role model as far as a leader is concerned.
And that's because of his mother.
Good mama.
She's the sweetest lady in the world.
Yeah, Charlie, didn't she?
No
I knew her for a long
Miss
time.
Minnie King.
Yeah. Well, I had to listen to her because my dad was a lot like Coach Doolin. Yeah. When I first saw the commercial, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listen. If my daddy walked in the house and opened his mouth, everything in there ceased. There wasn't no repeating it. You mow the lawn, you wash the dishes, you do this, you do that. We could all switch those jobs if you want to, but he was coming back to the one that he gave it to find out if it hadn't got done, and you was going to be addressed immediately.
Good days.
It seems like ancient history for some people when we go back 35 years. I know that my kids look at me and ask me things about integration in the South, and they look at me like, you've got to be kidding me, you know, that things were that way. So many of us lived through it in one way or another. Guy, you came along 8-9 years after Horace. You and Lindsay both came along 8-9 years after Horace, and how hard was it then? You know, we were in school at the same time, and I don't remember there being anything going on then as far as any race relation problems, and that was just 8 or 9 years later.
No, it was no problems then. I mean, Georgia, the number of African-American students had really increased. Player-wise, it had increased. It was just a great time. I mean, was no problems. I mean, with Terry and I, myself, Buck, I mean, we wore together down in South Georgia. But when we got to the University of Georgia, it was just one big happy team. I mean, we had a lot of shared common experiences from Rat Court to Seagraves.
Oh, Neil, the best party. The best parties.
I don't know
were
where to start.
Over at the old house on Prince.
Oh yeah, Prince, where we used to
What's the
have
name of that place?
the Animal House.
Oh, God.
Some of the older guys in there, who started Rat Court? Because they still had Rat Court going, and I thought that had disappeared.
Who started?
Maybe started with those
Where did it start at?
Rat Court.
Rat Court.
Oh, not only that, when you first came to Georgia as a freshman, they shaved your head. And the Rat Court was awesome because you'd have to scrimmage as a freshman against the varsity maybe for 2-3 hours. It all depended on what Coach Butts would think was ample practice at that particular time. Then you'd go up for your dinner, and then you start eating. They'd holler Rat Court. They'd get a fork and hit the glass. Say, we're having Rat Court tonight. There goes your appetite. You know, I have seen guys get Rat Court. They start out and they'd end up 30 yards down the field with the Rat Court. But Coach Butts thought that was part of the tradition. It didn't make any difference.
And it was great.
But
I mean, it was great. It was great.
you talk about tradition. You know, usually when you go to a bowl game, the tradition is you go first class, you stay in a nice hotel, you have good meals. We played in the Sugar Bowl. Believe me, I have never slept in the gym on cots prior to a bowl game. That's what we did playing against North Carolina in the Sugar Bowl game. Coach Butts feared that, you know, being in downtown New Orleans, we'd have some defection, but he controlled it.
We had some of those in '68.
That's what we should have done, is slept on cots. It'd have been better off.
Well, that's another story there. In '68, we go to the Sugar Bowl to play Arkansas, and I knew, and I probably shouldn't tell this on one of my dearest friend, Charlie Whittemore, but I got word one day we were going to practice that Charlie had the night before had won a chugging contest on Bourbon Street, and he was the preacher's son. I said, "Boys, we're in trouble." He had won a contest the night before. You remember that, Greg?
I wouldn't have told that.
Well, it was, that's 68. We got that a long time ago.
Well, we knew we didn't have a race problem when the Grand Dragon was a black guy. We knew we didn't have one. When the Grand Dragon came out, it was a black guy we knew we're in good shape now.
Who was that, Hudson?
Hudson
was one.
Hudson was one. He was one.
You were too.
Grand Dragon came out. There he was.
There he was.
I think Hudson was my freshman year.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yep.
Grand Dragon won.
Exactly.
Bill, when did it stop?
I guess we probably stopped Case probably in coaches there about 87.
Yeah, 87.
I think we reinstituted it 91.
Well, what y'all
My
did
freshman year, but then I think you stopped it, Coach T.
Yeah, I
in
stopped.
93 because it got a little out of hand.
Oh, it always got out of hand. The most famous Seagraves.
Well, we had a couple
Seagraves.
of guys go to the hospital and needed stitches, I think, and Coach T came to get us, and he kind of put us back into place. And I think it stopped then, didn't it, Coach T?
Well, y'all started getting a little bit rougher because the white lightning kept appearing, and that always took hold at that time.
I don't remember any of that ever happening.
But y'all's initiation process, you talk about rat court. As a young freshman, when you come in, you don't know anybody. And I remember in 72 coming in, and we came down to that field, and Glenn was with me. And they all, first thing you get out of your car, all the upperclassmen are sitting on the front steps. Of course, they got their hair all greased back, white T-shirts, cigarettes, and you're scared to death, and they think, oh, God's gift to George has just arrived. And as you're walking up the steps, none of them move. And they're eyeballing you and say, don't touch me. And as you get to the top step, a hangman noose dropped down. There was an old book. You had to sign the book, and it said, Rat Court, 7 p.m., be there. Well, what's Rat Court? You didn't want to know. But back in them days, you wanted to be like a cinder block in McWhorter Hall where no one would even see you. So all the freshmen, we ran to our rooms. Well, that didn't help you because they came and drug you out. Put you in the front of the dorm, and you're laying there, and all of a sudden, upperclassmen are walking around. They got loaded shotguns going off in there. And being from the north, being brought south, I don't know about this. Well, I'm sitting down, and I look over, and I'm rolling in the grass. They've poured every kind of concoction on you, and grass is sticking, you're itching. And I roll over, and I'm looking in the face of a guy I hadn't met yet. And I said, hey, Joe Tarashensky. And Andy goes, Breezy Reed. I said, hey, your dad played with my dad. And that's how I met one of my teammates during rat court. Well, then it came around the corner, great big hearse. And then a truck of about 25 upperclassmen with shotguns blasting away, screaming and hauling. I'm listening to some boys from South Alabama, South Georgia, and I'm scared to death because there's no coaches around. And all of a sudden, this cast comes out of this back of the hearse and opens up, and it was Paul Fearson. Of course, I didn't know who Paul was, but he was huge, about 6'7". He had all this wrap around his face, black hat, black cape, and we're doing Hail Grand Dragon, whatever they want. And you had to go stand in front of them, and of course, being from the north, I don't know what chewing tobacco is or any of that snuff. Next thing you know, you got a mouthful. Well, no one tells you not to swallow. Of course, then you get sicker than a dog. And so that was your first initiation into the upperclassmen. And everyone's sick, everyone's scared to death. You locked your door, but that didn't matter because it was a pass key. And during football camp, I do know this. One of my teammates, B.J. Luke, went through 8 different roommates. And every morning he'd wake up and there'd be a note, B.J., send my trunk home. And we thought there was something wrong with B.J. But the coaches kept putting somebody in B.J.'s room that I guess they felt was going to be heading home. And I lost 8 of my freshman teammates in 72 that would leave during the middle of the night. But that old initiation kind of went all the way through up until about 86, 88. Coach Mike Castranis used to tell me that rat court wasn't as tough as it was when y'all were there. Because what I heard, and what he used to tell me, was they used to take the freshmen down to the creek that goes underneath Sanford Stadium and comes out the cemetery. And they would blindfold you. And they'd take you right to the tunnel. And they'd take that thing off and say, you got to walk to the other end. And young freshmen, you'd start going there, you couldn't see your hands through your face. And you'd be walking through, slipping, hearing them little squeaks of them little furry things that run through there, scared to death, crying. And then all of a sudden you'd see that fake moonlight. You might be on the 50-yard line, about 20 feet underneath Sanford Stadium, but you'd see that faint moonlight. And he said you'd start running. It didn't matter how tough you were, because you were crying. And when you came out the other end, you didn't know that you were in the cemetery. And all of a sudden, there you were, scared to death.
I got to tell you about Rat Court. When I went there in '45, Coach Butts was working this 2 sessions a day in the summertime. The Georgia pre-flight school was still there, and they had all the good facilities. And we practiced in a little area behind Stegman Hall in the stadium there. It had car tracks and everything else in it, and sandburrs, everything else in there. But we were lucky that we get through a practice, so we didn't have any time for Rat Court. You know, if you had something that you didn't like about somebody else, you said it to his face and you had it out, and that was it. You know, when you sat down at the dining room table, it was all over. The dining room table cured a lot of the ills. So I did see one Rat Court, and I remember saying that my mother's the only one that ever beat my rear end, and nobody else is going to beat my rear end. And it happened to be one of the assistant coaches was standing there in the lobby at that time when I said that. There was never any more Rat Court. Now, it wasn't for me, but I think it was because everybody was kind of, you know, tuckered out from all those long practices and everything. And we did have fights continually. I saw a fight one time start on the 3rd floor at old Millage Annex, and they came down the staircase onto the 2nd floor, and they fought some more, and they got down in the lobby, and they fought some more, and shirts were ripped and blood's all over. And then they went out through the screen door out in the front, and everybody's out there around them and everything. And they fought for another 10 or 15 minutes, and finally the bell rang for dinner. Everybody just went on down to the cafeteria. Those 2 guys sat next to each other, eating their meal and talking.
Mr. Trippi, I didn't realize you were responsible for Rat Court. But typically they brought you up one at a time and you kneeled down in front of the Grand Dragon in that cow horse manure with the maggots there. And part of the drill, you had to stand up and tell everybody how bad you were. And typically the guys would stand up and say, I'm going to beat out the first string guy, or I'm going to beat up Wayne McDuffie, the offensive line coach. But in '81, Mike Zambezi, Ben Zambezi's younger brother, it was his turn, and he goes up and kneels down in the cow and horse poop, and he stands up and says, I'm so bad I'll eat. And he scoops it up, sticks it in his mouth, and the whole place just goes nuts. And for the rest of the year, when you'd walk in the cafeteria, you would ask Zambezi how it tasted. And he would respond, well, it tastes like crap.
More information.
That's more we need to know. A great tradition.
But you know,
that'll strengthen it.
Coming from Texas and not really knowing much about Georgia, and it was the only scholarship offer that I had, I didn't know any of the Georgia traditions. I mean, I got in my red pickup truck and drove 1,000 miles and didn't know anybody when I got there. And, 2 days later, I'm kneeling in front of Hudson, telling him how bad I am and watching all these other guys, and I got everything in my hair. And that's the beginning of my indoctrination into Georgia tradition.
You had a red pickup truck. You had a good start.
Yeah, I had the right color. But, the first Georgia football game I ever saw was one that I played in. And I can remember walking down this when you were doing the renovations to the stadium and walking down the steps and thinking, wow, this is an amazing thing that I've joined up for. And, it just got better from there. But it works into the fiber of your being, because before I came to Georgia, I didn't really have a respect for tradition, or there was no traditions that I felt I belonged with. But after leaving Georgia, and the longer I'm from it and reflecting on it, the traditions are very, very strong. And I appreciate the experiences of Rat Court and Seagraves, and although some people may find them demeaning.
They all had their purpose.
Yeah,
I
felt it brought us
we
together.
had all these egos coming in. All these Buck Balloos that were, he's the greatest quarterback in the history of football. And it did exactly what it needed to do. It put everybody back in their place, and you started climbing the ladder again. And it was good for what now, looking back, like you say, for what the purpose that it served, just as well as Seagraves finally allowing the freshmen, you're one of us now. You've been through it. You can.
Well, also at Rat Court, I mean, you were my big brother. I mean, after you stand and profess how bad you are in front of, then one of the upperclassmen takes you as a big brother. And so it kind of brought you into the team in that at least I had somebody to relate to that had been there for everything, and I could go to and say, hey, Scott, what's the deal with this? Or,
See, I was so naive and stupid, I didn't even realize what they were doing. You
were a good sport about it. I
was too stupid to realize they were degrading us. Because I remember when I first got there, and it's weird because, Frank Ross was my big brother. But the only reason Frank was my big brother, and I don't think I ever told anyone this story, I had read a letter that we had to report like at 5 o'clock or something. And I was so naive and stupid that, I'm from South Georgia, 5 o'clock, I mean, you get up at 5 a.m. and you go to work. So I thought I was supposed to be there at 5 a.m. And I remember hugging my mother. She was in a house coat. You don't want to hug your mother at 17 in a coat and stuff, and leaving about 2 in the morning to get to the University of Georgia before 5. So I got there about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was out there in my car, and I drove my father Black Impala, was the first car I drove up there. Well, I remember sitting out there. No, the Trans Am coming later. That was later. And I didn't get the bucket of money, but anyway. But it was weird because I got there, and the first guy that showed up was Frank Ross. Well, Frank, and I didn't realize he was degrading me too, because Frank said, freshman, bring my bags up to the room. So I thought I was helping him out. So I went and got his bags and ran them up to his room, and then he said, freshman, do this here. And I kept thinking, this guy's not too smart because he didn't know that my name was Herschel. So I was doing all this stuff for him. And he said, you know what, I'm going to be your big brother. And I'm thinking, that's nice. I got 2 of them. And stuff. So later, when he became my big brother, that's the reason I didn't do C grades. He told me, since I'm your big brother, you don't need to come. So I reckon my mother was right. If you're naive and stupid, God will take care of me, because I was just so stupid to realize that he was degrading me. And I was doing whatever he told me to do. Thought I was just being helpful.
Sounded like my continental breakfast experience. When we first got there, we moved in the dorm, and they tell us the next morning I had to get up, go upstairs, eat breakfast, give you a physical over in the Coliseum. And they ended by saying something about a continental breakfast. Man, I go to bed that night and I'm thinking, I'm gonna eat some food for breakfast from all up around the world, all across the country. I go over there and they take blood and they give you this physical. And they pop out there with their coffee and them donuts, orange juice and donuts. I'd ready to tear up the Coliseum. Breakfast was my favorite meal. And after we got done with that, we went to practice.
Well, a common thread with all of these guys is Georgia football was tough, and those who played they were tough players. I think the toughest maybe ever is Theron Sapp. He broke his neck in a swimming accident in high school. Coach Butch went to see him in the hospital, told him he still had his scholarship, and he played football. Now, if anybody who's ever been to the University of Georgia and truly wanted to play football, I think it's Theron Sapp, because all the doctors said don't do it. But he not only played, he would run over you, and he played about 6-7 years in the NFL. So Theron Sapp really wanted to play football.
Wow, what great stories of tough practices and tough coaches. Coming up next hour, we'll hear about Herschel Walker's freshman year and the 1980 National Championship team.